Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Babel webinar. My name is Simon Coughlin. I'm a director at Babel. We're a London-based tech PR agency working with tech clients across multiple sectors, and I'm pleased to see many of those clients with us on the webinar today. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We will allow some time at the end of this webinar for questions, but do feel free to use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask anything in writing throughout the course of the discussion. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. Camille Mendler is Chief Analyst at OMDIA. She has more than 25 years of multidisciplinary experience in the digital economy. She anticipates key shifts in B2B demand patterns with a more current focus on how exactly 5G is disrupting enterprise ecosystems. Rob Pritchard is Senior Analyst at Global Data. He is directly responsible for competitive intelligence research and generating market advisory research with a specific focus on segmentation, enterprise networking, channel, and ESG. Many thanks to Camille and Rob for joining us today. I'm also joined by my Babel colleague, Senior Campaign Director, Jen Kelham. Jen is the resident analyst relations expert at Babel. She has nearly 10 years experience in B2B, B2C and corporate PR and AR, having started her media and analyst relations career at Ofcom before joining Babel in 2014. So why are we here today? According to Babel's latest B2B tech comms barometer, the single most influential channel for B2B tech buyers is analyst and industry reports, with 58% of IT decision makers relying on them for making purchase decisions. Their influence is not something that can be disputed. So over the next 45 minutes or so, I will be asking our panel how your business can engage with analysts and the steps you need to take to ensure your messages hit home. So let's go over to the questions. Let's kick off by going back to basics. Camille, can I ask you to outline your role as an analyst and what a typical working day looks like?
Okay, well, I've been an analyst for about 20 years and the role has changed quite a lot. The analyst job, I think, has changed quite a lot. But what I currently do is I spend a lot of time with my clients on go-to-market strategy. That's a lot of what I do. And most analyst jobs is split between, depending on the type of firm, is on doing syndicated research, client inquiry, and also consulting. And then, of course, there's activities like going to conferences and involved in press activities. And that changes depending on your level of expertise. Usually the more expertise you have, the more likely you might be getting into the consulting game. I personally spend a lot of time doing consulting work, not as much as probably as I should, and syndicated research. And a lot of what I do is actually inquiry. So they might have an issue like there's some news that's happened, a competitor has, something terrible has happened. What is my take on it? What should they do? So there's a lot of real-time advisory that happens in my job, but broadly amongst my organization, we're a fairly diverse group. A lot of the work is producing syndicated reports and checking that everything is correct, going through the whole process, which can be quite tedious for everyone involved who's been involved in benchmarks. Not naming any names, but we've all been there doing the checking of the benchmark information on both sides. It's pain for everyone. And that's part of what we do. Let me stop there, but that paints a little bit of a picture. It depends on who the analyst is and the firm.
It certainly does, Camille. Thank you very much. And Rob, how much does that mirror to your particular role?
Ditto, totally. It is a mixture of day-to-day, long-term, mid-term, custom, reaction, so on and so forth. And I've been fortunate because I've actually been a user of B2B analysis for about over 10 years originally, then spent 2 years being an acquirer of it, and the last 20 years being a producer of it. What I would add, in addition to what Camille said, was that it's very useful to link the AR work with PR and IR, to have a sort of constructed single story, and just to be able to produce that and communicate it consistently, avoid silos and make sure everything is pulling together. And one of my roles at the moment is to look at ESG, and that is particularly true in ESG, where you sort of you have to look at the corporate level as well as the individual. I specialize in B2B, but you have to look at it from a corporate level as well. So other than that, yeah, I totally I'm with Camille. All those things are correct. It's a maelstrom of stuff, and within that context, good AR is extremely useful and helpful and welcome.
Well, and as a client as well, in many cases, they are driving, some of the 3-alarm fires. Drop everything. Tell us what we should do, possibly.
And then it takes them a year to work it out.
Yes.
So the clients that we work with here at Babel, some are well-established companies, some are startup technology firms. So what would your advice be for those companies that are on the start of their analyst relations journey? What advice would you have for them about getting to know you, building those relationships? Where should they start? Rob, any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, I don't travel because of various reasons, but so being available is really important. Being relevant is vital. Some people just flood you with stuff, and you just it just like gets a little bit annoying sometimes. But equally, anything that's relevant and exciting, we're delighted to look at it and think about it and write about it and blog it and so on and so forth. So relationships are the core to the whole thing, and communicating what's interesting. So I mean, in that sense, it's very much like the sort of the broader PR role. But I'd add on with AR, there's also the level of depth of information about, for example, products or rollouts or so on and so forth. So there's the exciting stuff, PR, but also as the sort of meat and veg AR stuff. We want to know what is actually happening. And I'd add to that just being available. We're always happy to talk to people because it gives us better insight. But also we're also always available to feedback if people want to bounce ideas around. I had one the other day from one of my clients asking whether they should join an industry body looking at ESG, and so it's the interactivity and relationships core, I would say.
I would say it's all about social, actually. And if you're a small firm starting out, frankly, you don't really have much money, and you're certainly not going to, hire someone on a retainer by and large. So get yourself noticed on social. LinkedIn is increasingly powerful. I used to be very negative about it, but it's, won my attention over the past few years. And, it's just as Twitter has done the opposite. I don't want to really travel those waters anymore. But I think Twitter, but I do think that LinkedIn and in particular is a great way you can find people who are interested in the same topics you're trying to promote, start a dialogue. I mean, I don't want to be sold to. I want to have a conversation. And I'm glad that the days of, in the really old days, because I am of a certain age, as one says, I can remember we used to get piles of press releases. I mean, literally piles of these buggers, and you'd get some assistant to open them if you were lucky, unless you were the assistant yourself. And those days are gone, and thank God we don't have to interact that way. But, LinkedIn is, I think, a great way. You start putting comments on somebody else's post, you do your own posts. I think that's a cheap and easy way to get the foot in the door. And then you might get invited to speak at a conference. And again, not much money. To get involved if you have the right message. And organizations like mine, actually, OMDIA is part of Inform, which is a huge, I think, one of the biggest conference companies in the world. Unless you have to put your hand in your pocket. I think what you need to do if you really want to make a splash, do all of that on a day-to-day. Then you do a targeted campaign, and then you get the AR and the PR together and coordinate. And you've got a certain bouquet of analysts, not everybody, but a certain number of analysts that you've already sort of built a relationship with that might maybe endorse because you're on the same wavelength. I think that's a pragmatic way if you're a smaller company to get started and do it economically.
Thanks, Camille. We've had a very early question in from the audience, a very relevant question. So, for example, if you're an early stage startup company, maybe at pre-seed or Series A level, you want to engage analysts. Clearly, the number of analysts out there is growing, specializing in different types of technology. How do companies find out which types of analysts they should engage? And link back to your recommendation about LinkedIn, Camille, what is the best way to engage those analysts at those early stages?
Well, think about the purpose. What is the purpose of engagement? Is the purpose for securing another round of funding? What type of funding? Is it actually to get a marquee customer, so a recommendation to a particular enterprise? Is it simply to just get exposure? There are different reasons, different purposes for which you would engage. And frankly, there are some niche analyst firms that do specialize in startups. And the larger firms, by and large, don't do that quite as much. So they're all, because they're serving a different audience. So think very carefully about what audience you're trying to serve. And at the beginning, I suspect it's the money men that you want to get hold of and getting attention there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's an interesting thing, because if you're small and in the startup mode, then you want the sort of big brands to follow you. Sometimes there are allegations that some of the larger players will only focus on those people who give them lots of dollars. But it's important that that you find the right people who are credible and who are specialists. And it's the relationship thing. And you have to, if you are going out with a message, you have to be clear what your message is, what your proposition is. It has to be something exciting. I mean, this is where AR, PR sort of overlap. If it's not something people are going to be interested in. The way I look at it is, if I saw it in the FT as an article, would I read it or not? And that's what it boiled down to. So is it something that excites people and gets people going? So I know that's more of a PR angle, but it also holds true, I think, to a larger extent.
Yeah, but the FT, it's a good example, because the FT has their own stable of analysts that they typically talk to. Or you're making life easy for them, and you're suggesting who might have already been briefed, on that particular topic. The FT is more likely to actually call someone, whereas the large percentage of journalists these days will just rewrite the press release and copy the quotes, I'm afraid, which is lazy but true.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other point about when you said about LinkedIn. That's also true. I mean, I've had little things I popped out and I've had over 1,000 hits on them or whatever. And so one of the things I do within my role is keep an eye open when we're talking to customers, but also to journalists and other analysts as well, is to make sure I'm signed up and linked with them so I can follow what their thoughts are. And also that then spreads further across the community. So LinkedIn is fantastic utility for this area in particular.
Thanks, Rob. There's been a couple of mentions about the involvement of cost. One of the questions we get from the clients we work with is it going to cost them money to get in some of your reports? So could you provide a bit of insight into the relationship between the cost of being in the reports? Is there cost involved, or are there any freebies that can help them get some good publicity?
Well, it doesn't cost to get into our reports in the benchmark, if we're talking a sort of benchmarks, or most of the reports, but presumably you've got a certain level of profile, you've reached out somehow, but you don't have to pay to do that. But a lot of it comes down to resource, in the sense, because you've got to actually put the effort in to respond to the questions. You've got to make your executives available, or whoever's responding to, whether it's a spreadsheet you have to fill in or the questionnaire or whatever. And that is a resource suck, quite frankly, for organizations. So you've got to consider the cost benefit of doing that. But in terms of being charged, you're not going to get charged. You might get charged for awards on the conference side. I've noticed that a lot, but it's not pay to play in my shop. And I don't think it's I know it's not in yours either, is it?
No, I mean, absolutely. we cover companies that we don't have relationships with in terms of commercial relationships.
Yeah,
because they're often
we
the
have an
more interesting ones.
Charter, if I remember correctly. I can't quote it, but it's something that's contractual. You may have something similar, Rob. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I mean, what happens is, I think as the relationship evolves and you build trust, some of our customers, on my relationships, they've asked if they can quote us in things like press releases, in ESG work they've done, and press release, sort of generic press release, and even in a proactive sense. So we say to them, look, if you've got something coming out which is of interest and you want some prior thought and analysis on it, we'll help you. So that the impact of your activity, and also it promotes us as well, which is part of the job, is to promote who we are, what we do.
If they weren't a client, would I want to be quoted in their press release? And the answer is depends. Depends if it's a cool area or not. Do I want to be associated with that organization? Is it going to irritate my other clients if I do say something? I would consider that. But by and large, it's my personal decision. Though, I'd have to, I have to make sure that they're quoting me as I want to be quoted. I don't take quotes that someone else has created for me, by and large, usually.
Yeah, and the other thing is, don't ask for quotes from people who don't have the knowledge, because like this morning I had a thing from a journalist about some random AI bit of regulation, and I'm not in a position to answer that, so I forwarded it to one of my poor colleagues instead. So know who you're talking to, know what their expertise is as well. It's very important.
I want to hear from Jen. She said nothing, and she's worked at Ofcom, and they're really difficult about. I'm sure you know some things you could be sharing with the wider audience too.
And they keep referring things to the larger government. Now it gets too difficult.
Well, I do have some questions for Jen. Let's hop over to Jen, because we want to get her involved. So obviously, Jen, our role here at Babel, working with clients, is not just to help them get some great media coverage, but also to help them get or build relationships with analysts like Camille and Rob. So when we start working with clients for the first time, is there a difference between how firms should prepare their messaging when meeting with journalists versus clients? What do we tell clients, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes is the short answer, that there is a difference. A friendly analyst once said to me that analysts are truth speakers. For them, it's not just about the what is happening, like maybe with the media, but sort of very much the why and what might therefore happen in the future. She also quite dropped in that she's a she. She also quoted that analysts are the original influencers, and that companies very much want to get into the head of analysts. They're the ones having the conversation with different companies and within the industry, and also putting together these reports, which, like you mentioned, Simon, are influencing buyer decisions. So whilst journalists and the media generally are good for amplification, analysts are looking that bit deeper. They want the lowdown, and actually in some cases they actually often help journalists in their understanding of like difficult tech, for example. So sort of bearing this in mind, a few of the key things that we might say in terms of prepping for an analyst briefing would be, which I would say is a bit more of a two-way conversation, unlike with the media where it might just be the client speaking to the journalist, but analysts obviously have those insights and they can offer that two-way conversation. So we suggest firstly tailored messaging. So obviously, analysts have that specialism. So whilst conversations can very much begin with that overview of the company update, it should also focus very much on the subject area of the analyst. You might want to include things like financial details, strategic direction of the company, what you deem as the competitive landscape, and then sort of industry highlights, perhaps. You want to be sort of sharing news and information up front, so things like presentation decks, because that's very helpful, and be thinking of that sort of long-term outlook, things like growth prospects and goals, foreseeable challenges, and then sort of opportunities for solutions. And then with all this in mind, just be thinking, being transparent and honest. I think Camille and Rob, you might agree, but analysts don't like inflated information. You just want the facts when it comes to speaking with companies. So we would very much advise that you stick to those. And then sort of being reliable and prepared. And again, this is a conversation I had with an analyst, but, very similar to journalists, but analysts, your time is very, very precious. We respect that. So having things up front, so you're prepared for the conversation just as much with any information that you need, whether that's like press releases from the company, and also just having time, I guess, in case you want to come back with questions. But I guess just to reiterate, what I would say the key difference is just analysts want that insight into the company so that moving forward, any sort of future conversations with companies or reports that you're writing, you want the company, as a client, you want to be at the forefront of their mind. So making sure that the analyst is sort of armed with that information. And that is something that your analyst relations partner or internal team would be able to support with.
Yeah, on that front, interestingly, I'm trying to update some work on an American company, cable company, won't name them, and they deny access to their website because I'm in Europe, and it's just like detail like that is really stupid, because how am I going to feel positive about them if I can't even access their website, which is a public domain website in the States, unless I go through VPN and all that. But why should I be doing that? It's a website, for God's sake. The other observation I'd have as well on AR and within tech. I mean, I'm less of a tech-minded person than most folks. I come from a marketing background, but something we've noticed recently is a far more linked approach where technology seeps through to business results. It's very important to be able to understand how technology is used in business. So there's a lot of talk about sort of, for example, working from home after COVID or during COVID and post-COVID. And so there's whereas traditionally tech analyst companies have been very tech focused and often on a particular thing, so whether it be SD-WAN or Ethernet or whatever, increasingly my perception is that we need to take a customer and enterprise focused approach. So we have to understand it from their perspective, what they want to achieve and how tech can enable that. And so we're selling more to CMOs now than we used to, rather than just sort of the analyst community. So it's a far more C-suite activity these days.
I think I'd like to add one thing, and that is that I think that the AR function has changed from my perspective amongst some of the people I'm dealing with, and that they are more directly involved in sales enablement with numbers associated with that. And it is becoming more of a strategic role in of itself. And I feel that, quite a lot of the analyst relations people I'm dealing with, some of them are former analysts, and they are continuing to do that, to perform that activity to some degree, and sort of picking from different analyst groups. And if you've got a number on you, and actually we've all got numbers to, targets to hit, I think that changes the approach. And I think that's probably a good thing. I suppose the difference between someone like myself who's working for a particular company, I'm sort of a doctor with many patients, versus someone who's in-house, who has that, who might be managing AR, but also does some analysis as well. And they are dealing with one, but maybe not as expert on a particular malady, might be, to continue the analogy. And journalists, on final point on the journalists, they're as smart as analysts, they just have less time. And so they have to gather and move really quickly. They're under the gun. But they're not responsible for some of the decisions that are made below the water. That's one of the differences.
Thanks, Camille. Another question from the audience. Can the panelists set out what is currently exciting them from a research point of view? Are there any tech areas that they're currently interested in exploring in more detail and welcoming views on? Camille, any insight?
I'll give Rob a chance.
Go on, Rob. Go on.
AI every day. It's gone mental. And across all segments, AI is just taken over. I mean, we have this thematic team that look at the it's more at the commercial end of things. So where we look at what keeps C-suite people awake at night. 2 or 3 years ago, we included COVID coverage in everything we did. Now we have ESG in everything we do. And I've suggested today that we include AI in everything we do, because we're getting so much information on and questions about it, and it's going to board level, and it's it's just everywhere at the moment. If BBC and Sky are talking about it, then who am I to disagree with them?
Oh, so from my end, well, I'm a bit OCD, and years ago I had a job for some time. I used to negotiate contracts, sort of bandwidth and dark fiber and things like that. And that sort of contract aspect, service level agreements and contractual agreements are still of great interest to me. And I've done work for enterprises on that front. But what's the reason I mention this is most recently I've been doing some work around 6G. Yes, you heard it, 6G. I'm on my third project, 6G project, and I've been sort of speculating what contractual agreements would look like where the service is something you can feel or smell or something like that. And that's been very intriguing for me, just thinking about the sensory aspects and how you could monetize delivery of service, providing a service when it's got those sort of sensory aspects to it, is, because right now I do a lot of work with telecom companies, and they're sort of very in the world of, I'll provide you 5 nines availability, but that means nothing when everything needs to be a sort of a hedonic scale. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but what 6G might be in this sort of, multi-dimensional world is quite intriguing to me at the moment.
I guess also there's the metaverse, which goes up and down a lot.
Which is related to it, for sure.
Another question, a very practical question. So for companies that you've had those initial conversations with, how regular do you like those touch points to be? How regular do you like to get updates from those tech companies? Rob?
I would say a good annual event is really good, just to have a complete sort of update. I personally, because I don't travel, I prefer it to be virtual and in person. My colleagues travel, they go there, they have the free coffee and sweets and stuff. So an annual sort of, whoa, this is where we're at, this is where we're going. Then regular updates. I mean, it doesn't have to be shoved down our throats every day. But anything significant, again, it's my old FT journalist thing, am I interested or not? Yeah, will I write about it? Does it make a difference in the market? So those sort of things. And then honestly, regular, I mean, I talk to some of my customers on a weekly basis, just have a catch up, find out what they're thinking, because it helps me help them think, and it also helps them help me think. So it's about the relationship, and it can work at whatever periodic system is required, but make it the importance. I mean, the frequency is sort of important, but more important than the frequency is the importance of the stuff. So some people have updates. You have a conference a year after last year, and essentially nothing's changed. And I get a lot of some of my colleagues come back and say that's a waste of time. So it has to be relevant and of interest.
And I travel a lot, but I wish I did less. I guess I get the air miles. What I found particularly useful is really highly targeted webinars on specific topics. Frankly, I don't read press releases. I ignore not most, that would be quite revealing, wouldn't it? But quite a lot of my email I do not read. But I do a lot of social, and I do like targeted webinars, and I think that's a lot cheaper than those once a year annual sort of analyst or PR events, which are incredibly expensive. They're cattle calls where you're fed the same meal, which might be good or bad, and if you're lucky you might get corridor talk, which means you might get a slightly different angle than somebody else. So some of them, they can be fun, but it's more social than professional, quite honestly. But those webinars, I think some people put good effort into them. They're not as expensive, and they can be very valuable, I think, to a smaller targeted group like this, perhaps.
May I add also that any webinar that includes the chief executive is value added. It gives you proper insight.
Yeah.
Well, that nicely takes us on to my next question around the way in which you like to consume news and updates from technology companies. And we have a poll for our audience, which I will launch. Hopefully you can see that on your screens at the moment. And this relates to a topic which we talk to our clients a lot about, the issue of embargoed news. So clients will come to us and say, we've got this big news announcement, We want to get some publicity for it. Should we be offering embargoes to journalists and analysts? So the question is, to the audience, would you be comfortable sharing embargoed news with an analyst? I will give you 5 more seconds to respond to that question. Okay. So the majority of people, 88% have said yes, they would be comfortable sharing embargoed news with an analyst. So the question is, Rob or Camille, whoever wants to go first, are you happy or do you appreciate receiving embargoed news from technology companies, and how do you use that information?
I want someone to call me and tell me about it, or message me via social media. And it's pretty stupid not to approach us with embargoed news. You know why? Because you might get some free messaging advice if you're not a client as well. So why wouldn't you do it?
And Rob?
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's stupid. We are intelligent individuals who know what we're doing, trying to keep us in the dark. And often we know the embargoed news before it's actually released anyway. So, you know, if we can add value, it's a relationship thing. And, you know, we can make an observation in the PR. It'll add value to what your message is. So, you know, we're professionals, we're trustworthy. If we did something stupid, we wouldn't have a job. So it's idiotic not. And, you know, it's an opportunity to seize, because you can get more oomph.
And Jen, what type of advice do we offer to clients when it comes to embargo news?
Yeah, so I think it's always worth checking. I think reaching out to the analyst to just double check that they're happy to honour the embargo, or if you already have that pre-existing, go ahead with the analyst, and that won't be a problem. But yes, otherwise we would always mark a press release with the embargo time, just in case, and just so the analyst has a heads up that it is sensitive information until the go, just because that news might be still to be circulated internally with stakeholders. For example, it's not always just about us going out with media, it might be for their own internal communications as well. But yeah, other than that, like it's all about the communication of the embargo.
My one caveat would be if it's stock price affecting, then probably not going to happen.
Thank you. Another really good question in from the audience. Rob, you mentioned earlier on that you're very keen to hear from chief executives on webinars. So the question is, which spokespeople are you most interested in meeting with? Would you get out of bed to speak with my product marketing or sales directors?
Yeah, if they had an interesting product or channel of sales and initiative, I would. But it has to be brainworthy, if you like the expression. But you know, I don't want to be drowned in non-stop nonsense, which we tend to get. But anything which is fun is great. You know, we want to talk about it. It's what we do for a living.
Yeah, there is the danger, of course. I was talking to some of my colleagues at work about the different types of briefings out there, and there's one called the hero worship briefing, where, you know, a CEO or some other luminary has been wheeled out to meet you. It's like big rah-rah, and it's just you in a small group, this person and this small group, or it might be one-on-one. And in fact, what happens is this person is just there to talk about, just talk. You don't want to have a dialogue at all. You know, it's not about building rapport. It's purely for their own ego. That has a very dramatically negative effect. So I don't care who they are, as long as they're willing to have a dialogue, and it's a two-way street. You know, squeeze me for information, also my insight, as well as them. You know, we're all professionals, and if you're properly trained in that company, there's nothing to fear, and it's good all round to have that dialogue, rather than, you know, a rigid script.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, strategy is interesting and important. Fluff isn't. I was recently put in charge of PR for our tech group, and I said I'm a strategic marketer, but not a blower up of balloons. And that's where it boils down to. You know, if we're doing PR, it has to have relevance. It has to be something people be interested in. We're not just going to write, oh, we've written something about XYZ and here you are. And every journalist is going to look at it and go, whatever.
Jen, a question for you that we've had in. When it comes to clients that have appeared in analyst reports, maybe they've performed well on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, for example, how best should they expand that publicity? Should they put out a press release? What other channels should they use to promote that good news?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, when that does happen, especially if it's a positive mention in an analyst report, then this is very much a key goal of analyst relations. It's an incredibly valuable business tool. Things like enhancing reputation, boosting visibility, even generating new business opportunities. And so if you really want to maximize any coverage that you're getting and really have that an increase in the overall impact of your analyst relations and within the analyst report, then there's a few things you can do. So firstly, you really want to be understanding the audience. So companies, when they're doing analyst relations, need to be thinking about who the target audience of the analyst report is or who the analyst is speaking with. Tailor the message accordingly, which we've discussed. That includes things like understanding the industry focus of the analyst, the needs of the readers, and even the tone, the style, and the formats that their reports come in. And then obviously leveraging the report. So using their report as part of the broader sort of marketing and communication strategy to establish the company as a thought leader. You can quote from the report, you can highlight positive mentions, for example, share it on website, on social, like we've said, and via other channels. And that's something, again, that your AR partner or internal team can support with. And then the other thing you can do, like you mentioned about press releases, but providing context around that. So companies that provide context around positive mentions, it might look like explaining how the product or the service addresses a particular market and a market need or a customer pain point. And it can help readers really understand the significance of the mention and increase their interest in the firm. And then sort of in addition to this, you want to use the opportunity, if that has happened, to build a relationship with the analyst. So at the beginning, as we touched upon, this is making sure you're providing relevant and timely information, contributing insights into research studies, and then even potentially offering feedback. But then afterwards, follow up with the analyst, thank them, because that will hopefully reinforce the relationship and potentially lead to additional coverage in future reports as well.
And conversely, I tell analysts, you should always thank the AR person because they've made this happen. And they might, if you're nice, they might help you again.
Yeah, it's relationship business. And there's an interesting one about sort of exploiting PR through analyst reports. I'm not going to name names, but some companies sort of have an exceptionally strong marketing approach to this, which is fine. But when it comes down to it, when you're running a business, it's more important to know what you're doing than to have a nice slide for the investor relations thing that's going on. So, there's a lot of, it's important to make sure your sources are well educated, informed, and credible. Every analyst company is well educated, and informed, and credible. It's just what they're talking about and how it's presented is often so you need to think about. I think that's as delicately as I can put it.
Thanks, Rob. And another question from the audience. I think this one's from one of our US clients. Which events are you at this year? Would love to catch up at some point. So, Camille, you mentioned you're still traveling a lot. Which US or European or elsewhere events you
So I will be in the US. I'll be at Big 5G. I'll be at Cisco Live. So that's May and that's June. There might be some client stuff I'll be doing as well. I'll also be at London Tech Week, which is one of the conferences that my parent company runs. there are some other, quite a few others that, again, because we're a large conference company as well as analyst firm, I'll be at, but that gives you a sense of where I'll be.
I'll be at none because I don't travel. So I'll be at every virtual conference. My colleagues, who for some reason like jumping on planes, will be at them. I mean, Mobile World Congress, I guess, is the key one. I don't work in consumer, so I don't know about MEC or whatever. But that seems to be, and we had a lot of people there, and I think it's about 80,000 attendees in total. I don't know, Camille, if you were there or not. Or...
And if anyone's listening, there is always a conference in Hawaii in January, and I've never been, it's called the PTC, and I've never been able to go. There's never been a legitimate reason, but if anyone's on this webinar that's got a legitimate reason to invite me to go to speak or whatever, I'm up for it. Okay.
That's very generous of you. Thanks. Just a reminder to everyone that's listening in, if you want to ask any questions, then please do use the chat function. Another one in regarding time frame of your reports. So how often do you, as an analyst house, produce reports? And how often, or what's the difference between when a company first builds those relationships with you to when they might expect to appear in some of those reports?
I mean, it depends. Some reports literally take, 3 to 6 months. Some of them might just be very short in a week. Some of them might be a blog. And frankly, I think, some of that social stuff is valuable as well. So it really is a range.
Totally
and some of it's below the waterline, because you're speaking to other clients about that particular company in a strategy session or a consulting project that they may never be aware of, actually.
Yeah, similar our end. I mean, we do blogs. We also have verdict/comment wire, which goes out to apparently 40 million users. So we do a lot of stuff on there. And then in terms of if we do something like a company assessment, that would generally be 6 monthly, but it could be 12 months. And then large topics we do on a sort of broader basis, comparing and benchmarking companies. That's probably an annual basis. So it's a mixture alongside what Camille said. It's sort of, some of them are regular annual things, some of them are semi-annual, and then there's a lot of ad hoc. If something happens that's of interest, then we'll write about it and say, actually, this is a stupid idea, or actually, this is brilliant, this is fantastic, it's changing the market. So it's all the way from sort of 0 to annual. The toughest thing is killing reports, because you never seem to be able to get rid of them and just end up getting more and more work.
Another question on the topic of ESG, something that we've been focusing on with our clients for the past couple of years. Suggestion that this is maybe a question for Rob. What sort of impact or action are you interested in hearing about with regards to ESG? There's clearly a lot of cynicism in the media. What's your view on ESG?
Wow. Okay, we within our thematic team, which want to do the C-suite stuff, we have dedicated ESG stuff across 20 plus verticals. I'm lucky enough to cover ESG in enterprise and technology. It's just so huge, it's impossible. So I mean, for example, I'm writing a report on scope 3 at the moment because no one else has, and it's so difficult because customers, companies, enterprises are struggling themselves with it, but it's starting to become clearer now who actually gets it in their DNA, and those people who just doing tick boxing and greenwashing. And so there's distinction coming through, but also there are all the other things like the Ukraine war and all the other things which are distracting people. But I was just watching, I think it was, I remember it was BBC or Bloomberg, but they were talking about, it was BBC, they're talking about Greggs, which is well known now, of delicious hot sort of sausagey things. And actually it was Sky Business, that's right. And the chief exec was talking in detail about why they're doing it. what they're looking to achieve in terms of the cyclical economy, and then donating stuff to charities and stuff. And so I wouldn't say it's been easy to ignore ESG. It's become less of a priority recently, but it's there and it's happening. And so when it comes to tech ESG, actually tech as a sector leads in ESG reporting. Like when you go from either data centers, hyperscalers, through to a lot of the companies now have portals where you can measure how much damage you're doing to the planet. People like Cisco highlight the fact their latest routers are sort of like 90% more efficient than the previous ones. So it's absolutely fundamental. So the issue within ESG in tech is credibility and measurement.
Camille, anything to add on ESG?
I was just thinking the one thing I note is that it will drive more interest and usage of pay-as-you-go, demand, usage-based, demand-based type of service consumption, because it is, after all, more efficient. Pay as you use is, by definition, more sustainable, is it not, than hoarding, I don't know, whatever it might be, digital assets. So I think that's very much related to ESG. There'll be an impact on how we consume digital services.
May I add also, it's commercially beneficial as well. There's another area I'm working on, in that, for example, I think it's Cisco offer you upgrades to your kit if you send in the old kit. Now, that's great because it saves the planet, but also it saves the customer. So, there are two aspects to this. It's commercially viable as well as doing good.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Camille. Another question, they're coming in thick and fast now, for Camille and Rob. So clearly you're very busy in your day roles as analysts. Can you talk a bit about what other roles you're asked to do in the industry, whether it's judging, events, awards, invites to podcasts? What's your appetite for your non-day roles?
I mean, I judge awards, and it's an honor, and it depends on the quality of the awards. I'm actually the head judge for the TM Forum, their Excellence Awards, and those are really interesting, intellectually interesting, and it's really fun speaking to other judges. So I have an appetite for that if it's an area I'm personally interested in. And sure, we all do media activity like podcasts and things like that. Rob, I'm sure you do them as well. It's sort of fun. You've just got to manage your time effectively, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't do awards as such. I try and limit my work week to 50 hours. And yeah, it's just, again, it's a merit thing. If something's interesting and fun and different, then it deserves attention, basically.
May I ask, what's your favorite part of your role as an analyst?
I like solving problems, so I really like certain consulting projects where it's, there's a real specific outcome. You're helping guide someone to a decision, whether it's an investment or a course of action, or diagnosing what the problem is, what's ailing the organization. I find that really interesting, and particularly if you're doing, there's certain parts of the world I've worked in that have been really interesting. I've done work in Bosnia. I remember doing some work there, and some of the emerging markets I've worked in have been really rewarding to work in, even though there've been sort of bullet holes around in some cases. So it's a very rich job, and I think I'm very fortunate to be paid to do it, to be quite honest. There you go. I'm satisfied in lots of the things that I do in this job. Maybe writing reports is the least satisfying because it's a template. I hate templates.
Yeah. 247 characters for this bit.
Yeah, that's right.
I would say, I mean, I'm sort of slightly different to my colleagues, my direct colleagues, because I've got a marketing background rather than a technology background. So technology, I don't find it exciting per se. I know, shocking. But the implementation of technology in enterprise is fascinating. So that's why I work on things like channels, brand, ESG, segmentation. These you know, I sort of fit in that bit in between technology and customers, and just look at I find it fascinating how people make decisions, why they make decisions, whether they're buying price or complexity or reach or just lack of IT people, or, you know, there's a whole load of commercial issues which are absolutely interlinked with all technology decisions.
Lovely, thank you both.
And Camille, you touched on an interesting subject there about geography and international reach. A large proportion of the number of clients that we work with here at Babel are US headquartered. So whether you're US or UK or elsewhere headquartered, where should the analysts be based when it comes to who they should be building relationships with?
Well, nowadays, I don't think it really matters where you're based,
Yeah.
quite frankly. I mean, you have people around the world because they want to be around the world. Historically, there had been a cluster of analysts on the East Coast around Boston because, you know, several of the original major technology analyst firms were set up in that area. But, you know, there are clusters in Arizona, on the West Coast, partly, you know, because of Silicon Valley, but there are people in Colorado, people around the world, and that's partly for personal reasons. And thank God, because of digital technology, we can be, you know, in Snowdonia, or we can be on an island outside near Korea or wherever. It doesn't really matter anymore, as long as you can make those calls and participate in those webinars and things.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I cover a lot of our US cable companies, and I've never even been to America. So, you know, hopefully we're recruiting someone to replace me on that front. But yeah, no, it depends. It's again, it's a segmentation thing. My background is in B2B always, whether it be MNCs or small medium businesses, and there's some interesting macro trends going on where, you know, with all the deglobalization, MNCs, you notice people just sort of quietly but not openly backing away from that market, and everyone looking to the SME market as the growth area, and Soho as well. And the thing is, it gets ever so complex when you get to those sort of 5.4, 30 million or whatever customers, as opposed to, you know, the global 250 or whatever. And so there's a lot of inquiries have come through about how do we understand the market. And when it comes down to segmentation, I'm a big fan of behavioral segmentation, because you'll have some people who buy always on price, but other people need help, you know, and whether they go direct or through value-added resellers, master agents are becoming more and more important, or systems integrators, and the whole value chain is changing as well. You know, do you need to own the infrastructure or not? Do you need to offer professional services? What is your role? Do you own the customer relationship and assemble things for customers, or do you own the infrastructure and let someone else do it? There's a lot of different things going on at the moment, and so this is where it's really interesting to talk to the chief execs or whatever, or CTOs, CMOs, to understand quite how they perceive where the market's going and what they're looking for. A lot of them still don't know, and I don't think anyone has a definitive answer, and there are probably 2 or 3 different answers.
And those 99% of enterprises, as Sohos and SMEs, do not buy analyst reports, but they might be influenced by them. They, you know, they are using social, they're using media channels that might be linking to an analyst report. So the function to reach them is, you know, some sales enablement where the report is made available to them. So that's a different type of function, but it's entirely relevant. So as much as Babel's survey found that, you know, analyst reports were terribly important to that smaller enterprise group, they are less important. They're part of the mix, and it would be naive to think that we would be the preeminent source for that group. We're just
Exactly.
part of the mix. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the challenge, opportunity, whatever there is to use the insight of analysts to address the broader market. So, you know, you get us in to explain what we understand about what's going on. Then the people who are going to market with their services can say, look, the analyst community thinks this is going on, and we can answer your questions with these products. Because, yeah, as Camille says, yeah, an SME is not going to buy a Gartner report. They couldn't. It cost their entire salary.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Camille. We're coming towards the end of our time. We have one more question, which I'll pose to Jen. So at Babel, we work with our clients to arrange both journalist and analyst relations throughout the course of the year, briefings, etc. Do we see a peak of activity at certain times of the year? We've spoken about NWC, which is probably the biggest conference that we deal with here at Babel, but are there other peaks of activity?
Yeah, do you know, I think at MWC this year we had over 70 just analyst briefings, and that was then media on top as well. So had us very busy running through the halls. Yeah, no, I think like Rob said, I mean, most analysts want to check in with companies that they're in touch with at least once a year. So you do try and sort of spread conversations out around that. But then other peaks will be quite dependent on the client themselves. So whether they have a regular pipeline of news that the analyst is interested in seeing, regular attendance at other events other than MWC. But yes, and then sometimes it might be around specific reports. So it would be analyst led. So if you knew that there was a report coming up that you needed insights and that the company can contribute towards, then we would be in touch on that. But I would say largely it varies. But yeah, there are definitely opportunities that we would call peaks of activity.
I would observe there's a confluence between IR, AR, and ESG reporting. In fact, the other day I was doing some reporting and I found more information on the ESG report about a company than I did on their investor report. So I think they're all merging. So obviously UK it tends to be sort of early April, but you know, there's so much stuff that comes together now, and that's why I've mentioned the previous point about the linkages between AR, IR, and PR, because they need to be interlinked, and they are increasingly interlinked, and ESGR, whatever you call it.
Actually, is there a no-go month that you would say? I mean, obviously December is usually fairly chocker with other priorities and stuff, and summer. But is there anything that you?
I mean, let's not forget that it's you know, for many of us, we are renewing most of our business with our clients in the second half of the year, and particularly Q4, right? Yeah. So we're busy trying to deliver and, you know, make sure that we've done the right job with our clients so we can renew our business, right? Yeah. I would say September is one of the sort of a nexus of too many things already on the plate, but you haven't already, you know, you can sum that month, forget it. I think it's very difficult to get anything done. So towards the end of the year, it gets a bit squeaky, I think, with trying to get anyone's attention.
Yes, the cuddle quarter, isn't it?
Is that what we call it? I didn't know that. Thank you, Rob. You've enriched my day by teaching me that.
Great. So we've reached the top of the hour, come to the end of our time. Thank you very much to our panel, Rob, Camille, and Jen. And thanks so much to everyone who's tuned in today. You can find out more about our analyst relations services on our website, babelpr.com. And do feel free to reach out to myself or Jen for any specific questions. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Take care, folks.
Thank you.